What's up, everyone? Aaron Nagler here for PackersNews.com, live on Facebook late in the day on Wednesday. A bit of news coming in today. Overnight, obviously, Mike Pettine hired as the defensive coordinator for the Green Bay Packers. Spoke a little bit about that last night here on Facebook. Hope you checked out all of our coverage of the move at PackersNews.com. If you haven't, make sure you do, including a video we just put up, myself and Michael Cohen talking about the biggest challenges facing Pettine as he assembles his staff and takes a look at the Packers roster. Obviously, the other headline of the day, most likely, Elliott Wolf leaving for Cleveland to be assistant general manager under John Dorsey, along with his former colleague Alonzo Highsmith out there in Cleveland. Looks like that trio will spearhead the another attempt to turn around the Cleveland Browns, who haven't done a whole lot of winning since coming back into the league in 1999. But as for Green Bay, they got their man on defense. It sounds like Vic Fangio, that interview never materialized. The Bears put on the full court press to keep him in-house with new head coach Matt Nagy. And Gus Bradley, the other name that was connected to the Packers, we talked about it a little bit yesterday, he's staying in Los Angeles with the Chargers. So with that, I see there's plenty of people here with lots to talk about. And let's open it up for your questions. You agree with what Rex Ryan said, best defensive coordinator in the league? If you're talking about Pettine, I don't know about that, but I think he's an excellent hire. And I think he's a strong defensive mind and someone who does a great job in the areas where Dom Capers kind of fell off towards the end of his tenure in Green Bay. Whether it's really calling his defense and designing his defense to the strengths of the guys on the field, to being very game plan specific week by week to try and take out the strengths of the opponent. Those are all things that really bedeviled Dom Capers in his last few years in Green Bay. Please tell me why I shouldn't worry about Mike Pettine. He's an excellent coach. As I said last night, I've spoken to him on a couple of occasions throughout the years. He's an excellent defensive mind. The work he did in New York and Buffalo is pretty exemplary. Obviously, he was much more of an assistant in Baltimore when he was with Rex Ryan. When he came with Ryan to New York with the Jets, he took on more and more responsibility throughout his tenure. He really controlled those defenses, and they were excellent. If you want a kind of a point of reference, go back to 2010 and the Packers win here in New York at MetLife. That was a 9-6 game, if I remember right. Neither offense could really do a whole lot that day, but Pettine and Ryan and the Jets did a great job against Aaron Rodgers that afternoon. Are you going to miss Capers? I'll miss the angst it caused, his presence caused, because goodness knows it drove clicks and it drove interest. But I'm sure this new defense will have its own set of interest and drivers as far as people come into my Facebook Live to say, fire Pettine. Well, we'll see how long that takes. What role do you see Clay Matthews playing with the new defensive coordinator? Sam, that's an excellent question. I think, first of all, we got to figure out what his contract situation looks like. I cannot imagine Brian Gutekunst, looking at $15 million, which is near what his cap hit is going to be for the final year of his contract, when he could cut him and not have any kind of cap ramifications. I have to imagine he approaches Clay about a contract restructure, now in the guise of an extension, to kind of smooth out that cap hit. Now, there's no telling how Clay will react to that, if he'll be amiable to it, if he'll demand a cut trade, whatever. So it's hard to really get a grasp on, even if Clay is going to be on the roster. I suspect he will, but again, with Gutekunst in charge, we don't really have a track record to work off of as far as, what his, what positions he values, what he's willing to live with cap hit wise, etc. Assuming that Clay is back next year, I think they'll do a good job of kind of moving him around. I would see him much like Pettine used Mario Williams in Buffalo. Obviously, it kind of all fell apart when Rex Ryan got in there. But when Pettine was the defensive coordinator, before he got the head coaching job in Cleveland, Mario Williams was pretty excellent in that defense. Now, I don't think Clay is as dynamic as Williams was at that point in his career, at Matthews' point. but where he is right now. But I do think that they could use him both standing up and with his hand in the dirt. I don't think they'll ask him to drop too much into coverage, but he can definitely be a chess piece. I don't think he's a queen anymore, but he's definitely at least a rook or a bishop. What position do you think they will go after first now that they will be, quote-unquote, more aggressive in free agency? That's a very good question. I tend to think it'll be on the defensive side of the ball. I think that's where more help is needed. Really depends on how things shake out with the franchise and transition tags, determining what kind of actual talent is available. I know people have been throwing out names like Jimmy Graham, etc., as far as bolstering the roster, and that makes sense given the tight end position and the fact that Lance Kendricks will be the only tight end under contract. But again, you have to let that play out as far as what teams are going to do to keep guys in house and who actually hits the market. I do tend to think they will look at corner because I don't think they can. Obviously, I think they can count on a combination of Kevin King and Demarius Randall. But Randall really kind of shined in the slot. Now, obviously, it's a different defense now, so we're not quite sure how they're going to be situated. But you have to think Kevin King is strictly a perimeter guy. And then past that, Lindsey Pipkins showed some promise, but let's be serious here. He's not ready to be a 16-game starter in the league. He is good backup. He's good depth. But I tend to think they're going to need to bolster that position, and I don't think just strictly looking at the draft is going to do it. Other spots, it really depends, again, on how Gutekunst sees the roster and, talking to Pettine and what he wants on defense, where he thinks the easiest fix is. I mean, I could see them targeting inside linebacker. I could see if they run a 4-3 under, which he did a lot in Buffalo, maybe they determine they need a true Mike and they go out and get somebody, because I think you could put Martinez at the weak side linebacker. But I don't know about Jake Ryan or Joe Thomas holding up as a true Mike in a 4-3 under scheme. But again, that's all guesswork. It's really hard to know until we get a kind of an idea of what the roster is shaping up to look like, and what Pettine wants. Do you think losing Wolf will hurt us in the long run? William, no, not really. I think Elliott was right to take the gig that he got in Cleveland. Obviously, it's a bump up in title and most likely in pay. And he'd gone as far as he was going to go in Green Bay for the time being. Now, he could have waited around and waited for Gutekunst to flame out. If that's going to happen, we don't know. But I think this is really smart on his part. He can go help kind of spearhead a turnaround in Cleveland, if it is to happen. And then most likely start to get his pick of the litter when it comes to GM jobs that come available. Now, will one of those be in Green Bay? I tend to doubt it, but so from Elliott's side of things, I understand that. As far as Green Bay goes, I don't think it hurts them very much. I think, obviously, you don't want to bleed talent. It always hurts when a talented evaluator walks out the door, but I do think there's talent in the personnel group waiting in the wings, ready to step forward. And, they've got Gutekunst. Russ Ball is still there to manage the salary cap. At least for the next 3-4 years, I don't see it being that much of an issue. Now, if Wolf ends up getting a gig, say, in the NFC North somewhere, or even in the NFC, he goes on to build a contender, then that might come back to bite him. But for the time being, I don't think it hurts them that much. BJ Raji for lead cook. Nice. Why didn't they offer Wolf assistant GM job? Josh, we don't know if they may have. Gutekunst indicated that they had a role for him. Tom Silverstein reported that there was, a specific offer made, but we don't know what that is. That hasn't come out yet. Now, maybe it will down the line here, but we can't really say if they did or they didn't. Do you think Beagle will develop into a standout for us? I tell you what, there's someone out living in California that really hopes they do, for the sake of his brand. That would be Justice Mosqueda, who I obviously had on quite a few times at PackersNews.com last draft season. I will do so again this year, but Justice pretty much, put his reputation on the line when he said that Beagle would be flat out better than T.J. Watt. Now, obviously, T.J. was healthy for most of the year and got to showcase what he could do. Beagle was off the grid for most of the year due to injury. Clearly, he didn't have an offseason, basically. He was injured that very first day of the very first rookie minicamp, and basically was shelved from then on out because of the Jones fracture. And, between missing all of the offseason, all of training camp, and then, the first 6 weeks of the regular season, it's not a surprise that he didn't have a bigger impact when he did end up getting on the field. Guy pretty much lost and needed this year to basically redshirt. So if he can have a full offseason in the program, get acclimated to the new defense, yes, I think he can be a factor. How much of one, that remains to be seen. Will Pettine teach the secondary to tackle, or will that be somebody else? That's a good question. I think it will mostly come down to whoever is the secondary's, either safeties or cornerbacks coach. And I think, I've talked about this a couple times here on the podcast, etc. You got to draft tacklers. And when you get to the NFL, they talk about, practicing the fundamentals, etc. But tackling is about contact. And contact does not happen in NFL practices. Not anymore. I mean, it barely happens in training camp. So, you got to draft tacklers. You have to draft guys who are solid wrap-up tacklers, if that's what you want, if that's what you're going to emphasize. Now, obviously, that hasn't been an emphasis under Ted Thompson. That hadn't been. But maybe it will become one under Gutekunst. We can only watch that play out. But for the most part, once they get to the NFL, they do thud practices, and yes, they practice technique, etc. But that's not enough to mold a tackler. If you either are or you aren't. And for the most part, the Packers have drafted a lot of athletes who aren't tacklers. And maybe that changes under Gutekunst, but time will tell. Why is Shields not playing? So it's a pretty simple answer. There's two things. So the history of concussions. Each one subsequently knocked him out longer and longer. And then two, he had obviously the legal issues hanging over him with the marijuana arrest. Now, that's probably come and gone as far as his suspension on the field, but all it would take is one more arrest or one more incident off the field, and he's probably suspended for a good number of games, if not a season. So you couple in the risk as far as concussions go, and then you factor in the risk as far as off the field, possible arrest, what have you. No general manager is going to touch that, not with a 10-foot pole. When will we re-sign Rodgers? Edwin, well, they don't have to re-sign him. They will sign him to an extension most likely this summer. He still has 2 years left on his deal, so he's not going anywhere anytime soon. But I do expect that will be a high priority for Gutekunst and for the entire organization, and I expect that to happen probably in the next 2-3 months. Philbin officially hired. They haven't announced it, but it's a done deal. He's on board. He is their offensive coordinator. Who will teach King to take it easier tackling? Hey man, I like his aggressiveness. That's what you want. And obviously he was raring to go, and he hurt his shoulder, which already was injured, and now he's had the surgery and had it repaired. I don't want to tamp down his aggressiveness at all. I thought that was a pleasant surprise. Let's see. If this defense requires more from the defensive ends, will we target one in free agency? I think there's a good chance. Now, when you're talking defensive ends, depends on what you mean as far as a 3-4 defensive end or a 4-3 D end. Because, as far as will they target traditional 4-3 rush ends, I doubt it. I think they would probably target outside linebackers, guys who can be a hybrid stand-up or put your hand in the dirt, because that is what's really worked for Pettine and Rex Ryan throughout their time Baltimore, with the Jets, and with Buffalo. Some people seem so down on Jordy, but he was having a great year prior to Rodgers' injury. I agree, because of the fact that he has great chemistry with Aaron Rodgers. That is his, biggest asset when it comes to the offense. His ability to read defenses like Rodgers does, especially after the snap of the ball when things are flying a million miles an hour. He knows inherently how things are setting up as far as his route and the defense and what adjustments need to get made, and he reads it exactly like Rodgers does. And that just, that chemistry, you can't teach it, you can't buy it, and it's something that only Jordy has with number 12 at this point. Now, obviously, Rodgers is building that kind of rapport with Davante Adams, but right now, Jordy's the only one, and that's what makes him invaluable from that standpoint. Now, Jordy has said he's open. He's publicly said that he is open to restructuring his contract, so I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. What do you think the first 3 positions picked in the draft will be, John? I have no idea. Ask me after the combine. Jordy has a huge cap hit for a receiver on the wrong side of 30. I agree, but like I said, he said he's open to restructuring, and I think that will happen. How do we use Montgomery next season? Good question, Jerry. I think you'll see him as a bit of a switchblade, kind of jack of all trades. I think you'll see him in the backfield as a third down back. I think you'll see him in the slot in certain formations. Mostly you'll see him used in situations where McCarthy wants to try and dictate what kind of coverages he's getting from the defense, because his greatest asset, and one of the things that really kind of helped the offense when they took off in 2016, a lot has been written and talked about as far as Jared Cook and his coming back from injury and how that opened up the offense. But the other component of that was Ty Montgomery really kind of flourishing in the role out of the backfield, where Rodgers could employ him and deploy him using motion and putting him in certain situations, whether it's in the slot or splitting him out wide, to dictate, force actually the defense to declare what kind of coverage they're running. And you saw it again and again on tape where he splits him out, defense declares, Rodgers makes an adjustment at the line, and off they go. It was really prevalent in both the Dallas game and in the which game was it? The Seattle game at home last year. Not week 1 this year, but in the year prior, 2016. Those are really good examples of Montgomery's worth as an asset on the offensive side of the ball. I know there's been a lot of questions about, because of how well the rookies played at the running back spot, do they automatically bump Montgomery to wide receiver? I don't think it really matters. They're gonna use him as an offensive weapon, and whether it's at wide receiver, whether it's at running back, getting him on the field is important, and getting the ball in his hands is important, because I think more often than not, good things happen when he has the ball in his hands. How does offensive coordinator role differ when not calling the plays? It's funny because some guys really kind of take to it. I remember Sherm Lewis back when Holmgren was the play caller and Sherm was the offensive coordinator. He was very much like Philbin in that he did a great job of breaking things down throughout the week as far as matchups, tendencies, looking at what defenses might call in certain situations and knowing how to counter it and having that available almost like a menu for the head coach play caller. Philbin was very much like that when he, by all reports, very much like that when he was in Green Bay, and that's why McCarthy did so well with him as kind of his right-hand man. He also did a great job up in the booth of noticing things, noticing coverages, suggesting things, saying, hey, try this, they're cheating this way, try this counter, etc. I don't sense that McCarthy was getting that from Edgar Bennett, and I think that's a big reason why he wanted to make the switch. He knew Philbin was available, he knew how well they worked together, and whether it's the work they do Monday through Saturday or the work that gets done on Sunday during game day, I just think Philbin is an upgrade. In McCarthy's mind, at least, Philbin is a bit of an upgrade, if not a major upgrade in that regard. Would you draft a tight end or use free agency? Peter, the answer is yes. That's a position that is screaming for an overhaul, and it's an extremely important spot in McCarthy's offense. They're asked to do everything. It's the one spot outside of quarterback that has the most responsibility, whether it's pass protection in line, being split out and running routes and reading coverages, whether it's being used as a fullback, H-back, or even a running back at times. They have to do pretty much everything other than snap the ball to the quarterback and or play quarterback. Outside of that, they do pretty much everything else that's required on the offensive side of the ball. And right now, they don't have much there. The cupboard's pretty bare. Now, maybe they bring Richard Rodgers back, and maybe his injury at the end of the year helps them in that regard. But I think they have to upgrade there. McCarthy's offense has always been best when he's got a lot of moving, the ability to move a lot of guys around there. And right now, there ain't much there. Oh, people. All right, everybody, I'll take one or two more. Ty Montgomery a possibility? Yeah, I've had a lot of people ask me about his move to possibly a tight end. I don't ever see him being a kind of a traditional tight end in line. He may have some of the responsibilities of a tight end, but one of the things you got to do as a tight end is block in the run game and in pass protection, and that has been a real bugaboo as far as Ty's career so far. Break tight end from Tampa Bay. Oh, he'd be a great addition, Daniel. Again, I'd be shocked if he hits the street. That's one of those things we have to wait and see if he's actually available. Can you help coach our defense? Nobody wants that. What are your thoughts of players playing below their cap hit? Keep them or cut them? Well, I think it's a lot harder to determine than what you're making it out there. As far as just looking at the production, box score scouting, and saying, well, they're not hitting X number of touchdowns or X number of yards, they got to be cut because of their salary. I don't think Green Bay works like that, whether it's Thompson or Gutekunst pulling the trigger. I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I think Randall Cobb has become a favorite whipping boy of Packers fans everywhere, and it's pretty unfortunate because the guy can't throw himself the football, and he's open on a consistent basis, does all the dirty work, does all the work over the middle. And there's only one football. He didn't negotiate the contract. He signed it. And he gets open. He does his job. But, because Rodgers doesn't, feed him, Packers fans want him cut. And I think that's a little ridiculous. And I'm not saying you're talking about Cobb. I'm just saying there's a lot more to it than just looking at their stats and saying, okay, he's got to go. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm sorry if I didn't get to your question. And no, the fire behind me, it's totally fine. Don't worry about it. And I'll talk to you guys soon. Make sure you're checking PackersNews.com each and every day, each and every hour. Lots going on. We'll have it all for you. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good night.